Hello, Dr. Cath here again, and this time we're going to look at autumn migration. It's the time of year that all the birds are moving around and everything is changing. Now, autumn is a time of movement, but it's also a time of settling down for the winter. But today we're looking at the movement bit. It's always very sad to see the summer visitors leaving us, the swallows lining up, martins lining up, and everybody departing that's made our summer full of life. But new arrivals will be coming anytime, and it's something to look forward to. The British Isles have a milder winter climate than anywhere else of equivalent latitude in the European landmass. And that means that we draw birds from a wide swathe of northern landmass. It extends more than 200 degrees of longitude from northeast Canada in the west to right across to central northern Siberia in the east. And no other equivalent sized area on Earth draws its wintering birds from such a wide longitudinal range. So we get all sorts of things coming here. More than halfway around the world in the Arctic regions, birds are coming here. We have 142 winter visiting species, including birds that are on passage, which really is a lot more than we get visiting in the summer. We only have about 50 migrant breeders come. So winter offers us a whole host of new birds. Autumn migration rather, has a rather different feel about it. It's rather more leisurely. The birds stop off to feed. It's more of a gradual process, not like spring's rush to the breeding grounds. More of a subdued sort of Zugenruhe. The urge to travel is not quite so strong. You get late broods that delay the departure of some species. Young birds might have to build up their fitness before they set off. Males and females sometimes have rather different departure times. For example, the ospreys, the females leave well before the males. The males stay with the youngsters, and the females get off to the wintering grounds. You also get first brood youngsters who may leave earlier than subsequent broods. Not all birds have more than one brood, but those that do, the first ones will be on their way. It's a great time to see birds that you wouldn't normally see on your patch. Passage birds going through. So these are birds that aren't stopping here for the winter, but they're going through on their way to somewhere else. And wonderful examples, like seeing a group of half a dozen whimbrels flying along the shore at Ellesmere when I was working there. And you never see them here normally. So it was a great sighting. You don't get to see, quite often it depends on the call rather than the look of the bird, because they're just moving through. But it's worth keeping your ear out and seeing what you can pick up on. Some of the early birds, they're not catching worms in this occasion, but they're passing through very much earlier. Non-breeders and failed breeders will be moving sooner than the ones that have raised broods, and they may be going through as early as August. Single brooding birds make the best of the conditions to get their migration done while the weather's better and the winds are suitable. We talk about obligate migrants. These are the ones that always have to move every year. They're depending on maybe on insects like the warblers do, and the resources aren't going to be there in the winter, so they have to move. These are the obligate migrants. So it's worth watching out for early movement, but there'll still be a lot going through. The peak time for it really is in October. Passage birds, the ones moving through to somewhere else, include young birds on their first migration that may be a little off track. So you might see almost anything. And they'll stop off briefly to feed. The location of the British Isles is just off the northwest corner of the European landmass, works as a crossroads of winds and ocean currents. So for the birds, it's like a huge hub airport during the peak migration periods, sort of April and October. Constant arrival and departure of different species landing to refuel on their way to their wintering grounds. So you get all sorts of things, and it's really good to watch out for them. I mean, some sites are particularly good. We had a lot of wading birds going through, and Wood Lane is a brilliant place to see them. That's just very close to Ellesmere Reserve there. And you can see all manner of birds coming through. This is a Pectoral Sandpiper, green sandpipers, other waders, avocets, they've been seen going through, ruff, black-tailed godwits, bar-tailed godwits, dunlins, all manner of things, lots and lots. We've even had red-necked and grey phalaropes there. So it's worth watching out at a site that's good for waders near you, just to see what's going through. They're not going to stay, so they're not going to be there very long. It's worth watching out on the, if you're particularly keen on the sort of bird reports, bird track, these things, telling you where they are, and maybe you'll have a chance to just get a quick look before they're on their way again. Geese also use the area as a stop-off. So we don't get flocks of wintering barnacle geese, for example. Most of them will be up in maybe in southwest Scotland, but you also get them moving down and heading for places like East Anglia, or even down to the Bristol area, to Slimbridge or somewhere. So watch out for them stopping off, having a rest, having a feed on their way. You also get white-fronted and pink-footed geese, tundra bean geese, all sorts of different geese. The migrant swans will be going through. These are the hooper swans and the Buick swans, and you can see them taking a rest on large bodies of water. We get them on the mere in maybe twos or threes. It's not like the big flocks of them that are congregating, but these are moving from their breeding grounds up in Iceland and Scandinavia and these places. They're moving down to their wintering grounds. So you might see them after, they tend to arrive tired in the morning. They might have come through during the night. Lots of birds migrate at night. It's safer. They don't have a problem with the navigation. They can use the star patterns, but they're not at risk of being predated by raptors when they're moving at night. So an awful lot of birds choose to move at night. Swans are one of them. We've had them at the mere. Get there in the morning, there'd be 2 or 3 hooper swans on the mere, fast asleep, absolutely tired because they spent a long night flying. And then they'll wake up early afternoon, have a bit of a feed, have a bit of a preen, get themselves sorted out, and then move on. So they don't stay there, they're just in passage. Terns go through. These are fabulous migrants. The Arctic terns go all the way from the Arctic to the Antarctic twice a year. Long migrations. Their life is a perpetual summer. And in passing, they'll cross places like the Mere and Chelmarsh and Venus Pool and these places, and maybe stop and do a little fishing. They keep their body fat up for the long flights. So we get all sorts coming through. We see them at the Mere, we see them at Wood Lane here. So, like I say, Venus Pool, Chelmarsh, Palmere, these sort of places. Anywhere that's a good expanse of water that might have small fish in. These are quite small birds. They want small fish. So we've got common terns and little terns that go through, but we'll also see Arctic terns and black terns quite frequently round the meres and round the lakes in Shropshire. A lot of these will be going through a bit earlier. We quite often see them in August and early in September, making the most of decent weather. Because the small birds, the passerines, will be going through as well. This is a black redstart. We don't see them in the area when they're breeding, but we do see them passing through. Ring ouzels, they do occur through the summer in Shropshire on the Clee Hills, maybe Longmynd, these sort of places, but we also get them moving from Scotland, where larger numbers of them breed, going to their wintering grounds. Wheatears, they're another one. They like to breed on moorland, so they could have been anywhere up in Scotland. They could have been in the Lake District, and all of a sudden you look out of your window and there's a wheatear there. Yeah, it's something you've never seen, maybe in your garden or your local park or on the edge of the mere, or anywhere that you normally are. You could come across one of these birds that is just completely out of place, and it gives you a little thrill all day that you've seen something that you don't normally see there, and there it is in all its glory. It could be I mean, if you're into that sort of thing, it could be a new tick for your patch list, or a new bird that you've never seen in the garden. But what a thrill that is. We get raptors as well. The ospreys, quite a few breeding around the country now, from being almost extinct here, and now building up. So there's birds breeding in Wales and in the Lake District and all over Scotland. So you might see one flying over on its way, or possibly even stopping to snatch a bit of lunch somewhere. So anything can happen at this time of year. This is a honey buzzard. These are another migrant raptor, and they don't breed, been known to breed in Shropshire, but they can be moving around anywhere. So you never know. It's a bit like a lucky bag. Autumn bird watching, you never know what's going to come along. Slightly more predictable is our regular winter visitors. These are the ones that come and they stay here all winter. So they can either be short haul or long haul visitors. Some of them come from some distance, some of them are quite local. And the waterfowl are particularly obvious, especially if you've got somewhere on your doorstep that attracts good numbers of ducks and geese. So again, those wetland places, large lakes, all sorts of winter wildfowl will arrive. And this one's a golden eye, and these come from Scandinavia and Finland. They also breed in the north of Scotland. Fairly recently started breeding there, mainly due to people putting up nest boxes for them. They're tree nesters, and it usually nests in holes in trees, and they need quite a big hole. They're quite a large bird, so they hadn't really done terribly well in this country before then, because up in the north they don't tend to have terribly big trees, but nest boxes are helping them. So these are coming down from right from the north of Scotland, from Scandinavia, Finland, these places, to overwinter, where it's a little bit warmer and a little bit milder. Pintails, absolutely glorious birds, beautiful things. They mainly winter on coasts and estuaries, but good numbers come inland. These breed right across Northern Europe, Siberia and America. We get about 20 to 30,000 winter visitors in the pintails, and they are absolutely perfect looking things. They look as if they've been designed by a graphic artist. If you see a group of them, they really are such elegant things. They have a rather long neck and a sort of upright carriage of their neck. I think they're absolutely lovely. Teal. Now, we do get them in the summer. We see teal here. The ones we get in the winter tend to be a different population to the summer breeders. The summer breeders will have moved on. So the ones that breed here and in the rest of Europe tend to winter along the French coast. They might even continue further south and congregate in Africa. But the ones that are from further north come this far and they think, well, this is a nice mild place. This is much better than where we were. We'll stop here. So we get little groups of teal pop up, not in large numbers. They're not in big flocks, but we get them coming in for the winter. This one you will get in big flocks. Widgeon tend to congregate in much larger flocks, and they come from their breeding area across Northern Europe, Southern Scandinavia, and almost half of the European population, that's about 380,000 birds or so, winter in Britain. This is a pochard, a delightfully scruffy looking one, but these strange little red eyes. And these are another one that come to overwinter here. They breed Central, Northern and Eastern Europe, so as far across as the Urals. These aren't Scandinavian ones. Coming from much further east. And there's a small breeding population here, but they're joined by about 60,000 migrants. Always worth looking out for because they're rather delightful little ducks. They've got sort of nice red head, and it's your chance to see them. Get out in the winter, get out and see these wonderful ducks. Of course, they're all in their breeding plumage, so they're not like the waders that are in rather dull winter plumage. Ducks have their breeding plumage on before they migrate. Shell ducks are another one that do breed here and are joined by migrants from further north. Very handsome, very large duck, and we get them quite a lot at Wood Lane, but we've also had them breeding there. So again, we've got that thing that the northern ones are coming down. Some of ours will stay here and some of them will move. So it's almost like a relay race or a game of hopscotch. Leapfrog, that's it. Moving on. These are Goosanders, and they're not really a true migrant. These are birds you'll see on the lakes in the winter where you don't see them in the summer, but they do breed on rivers in the north and west of the UK. They like to go to a larger water body for the winter. This is quite an interesting thing. These weren't found in the UK until about 1950, and then they colonized from the north with a strong westerly bias. So they were originally migrants. During the 19th century, the accounts of birds in Shropshire record them as purely as winter visitors. So they have changed their behaviour. These are birds that used to migrate from the north, have found that they can do perfectly well here through the summer. So at some point, some have stopped and stayed on the wintering grounds to breed. And now we've got good numbers of them breeding in Shropshire, but on the smaller waters. And it's a good chance to see them in the winter when they're moving out to these larger water bodies. Later in the winter, we might get sea ducks coming in and using our large water bodies here in Shropshire. So usually if there's been bad weather on the coast or particularly heavy gales or something, this one's a smew, is a rather handsome little sawbill. But we also get things like long-tailed ducks. These appear at the Mere and Chelmarsh and these sort of places quite regularly. So another bit of exotica, really. Really, numbers peak certainly on Ellesmere around about January and February. So you get a build up as these birds are trickling in. Also get things like skull and scoters, and they might move in for a bit and then not stay and move on, or they might stay for a few weeks and then move on. We get divers here too. These are absolutely, you always give you a bit of a thrill. Things like the great northern diver here in its winter plumage is rather dull. Don't have anything like the brightness of summer. Unlike the ducks, these ones have a different winter plumage. We also get the black-throated divers and red-throated divers. So it's a great chance to see one. There was a lot of excitement in 2013 when a great northern diver appeared at Ellesmere, and it hung around for a few weeks. It was a lot of bird watchers came to see it, but unfortunately they swim a long way underwater. So you get somebody coming and saying, "Have you seen the great northern diver? And where is it?" And you say, "Well, last time I saw it, it was right over there," but then it dived. It could come up anywhere, but well worth keeping an eye out for. They're absolutely lovely birds. They have this rather low in the water profile, unlike a sort of more buoyant looking duck. Gulls, of course, come in as well. There are big gull roosts where several species of gulls will gather together on open water for safety while they sleep. This is the one at Chelmarsh. There's another good one at Ellesmere, the mere at Ellesmere, and you get all sorts of things there. And I have to admit, I'm not really a gull spotter. They look a bit the same to me, but these big roosts do benefit from a bit of careful observation because there can be all manner of breeds there. So we get things like Caspian gulls, greater blackback gulls, little gulls, common gulls, Iceland gulls, glaucous gulls, less blackback gulls, herring gulls and yellow-legged gulls, all sorts of different gulls, and in all their different disguises. So they're one of these species that, or sets of species that have different plumage according to the age of them, whether it's first winter, second winter, this sort of thing. And it can get quite complex working out which one you're looking at. But just the variety, and also just the big mass of birds altogether, is well worth a look. Go to one of these places, just on as getting towards evening, and you can see them all streaming in from the countryside where they've been feeding to have the safety of that roost in numbers. Waders that stay with us include lapwings. Of course, these are birds that are quite threatened as a breeding species, but they're coming from further north to winter in large flocks here. Usually you can see them in good numbers on recently ploughed fields, or anywhere that's got mud around a pond. Very good. Wood lane is very good for seeing them. Anywhere that they can feed on the invertebrates in the soil. Curlews as well will be coming in to join the few that we have breeding here as a wintering ground where they're able to feed. These birds can't really survive if the ground's heavily frozen. So birds from the north have to move south where they can get that lovely long beak into the earth to pick out all their bits and pieces. So these are obliged to find somewhere to winter that is not frozen. A lot of them belong estuaries, and they'll move inland and back to the sea and inland again according to what the weather conditions are like. Water rails pop up. These are great things. Again, they're one that breed in this country, but we find them more in the winter. They move down from the further north, and you can usually find one around Venus Pool, around Wood Lane, these sort of places. And again, heavily reliant on being able to stick the beak into soft mud or soft earth to get what they need to feed. I've seen them at Wood Lane when it's been frozen, actually feeding on grain spilt from the hanging feeders that they put up for the small birds, and it looks quite ridiculous. If they can manage it, they'll always go for something that's invertebrates in the earth. Snipe, here are absolutely lovely little birds. Good numbers of them at Wood Lane and around other water bodies. Usually like somewhere very damp. The places you find them are always damp places. On farmland, they'll be in the ditches and again muddy places. They've got the beak that's perfectly adapted for picking invertebrates out of the soil and searching for worms. So again, they're one that's going to be where the earth is soft rather than in frozen places. So they've all moved down. Woodcock, jack snipe, these sort of things, exactly the same. They're not moving on with the other waders going down into Africa and places. They're staying here to entertain us through the winter. Very familiar winter visitors coming to our gardens include things like field fares. These are the big winter thrushes coming from Scandinavia. Absolutely spectacular looking things, and usually together with redwings. And they'll be coming into your garden to feed on berries and windfall apples. Hawthorn is very popular with them, sloes, these sort of things. So any berries you have in your garden is going to attract these absolutely lovely birds. And there are another one that migrates at night, and you see from the maps here the field fares coming from Scandinavia and more of the redwings from Iceland. So they join together here. They don't migrate together, but you can quite often hear them at night. You can hear them flying over. The redwings have a lovely sort of like whistling sound, and the bigger field fares have a sort of chap 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 alarm call that you quite often hear. And they are spectacular, and they'll come in large numbers to gardens and join in with the blackbirds and the thrushes and things, decimating the fruit trees. Then they'll move on to the next person's garden or the fields over the way, wherever they can find that fruit they need. Siskins, another familiar garden bird in the winter. These rather bright little finches. Some do breed in Scotland and even in North Wales, but they're coming to the gardens in the winter for the feeding. And again, they're coming from all over the place, and they'll be moving westwards as well as south, because the conditions here are much milder than you get in mainland Europe. They have the continental climate is much colder and much drier. So birds are taking advantage of the particular set of conditions we have here in Britain to survive the winter where they can get food. These are bramlings. You quite often find odd ones in flocks of chaffinches. So if you're not a regular bird watcher, but you like the birds in your garden, and you look out at your chaffinch flock and you think, well, that one looks a bit odd, there's a good chance it might be a brambling. So watch out for them, because they're rather lovely little things, and they'll be feeding in much the same way as chaffinches are. They getting around on the ground, picking these up. They particularly like things like beech mast, but will take sunflower seeds off the ground and that sort of thing. Large flocks of them in beech woodland, picking up the beech mast. And we get a few, these are not necessarily long distance, but we get a few raptors and owls coming in. Short-eared owls will move from the frozen areas in the north and come further down the country. Again, they're a sort of heath moorland bird, so they come from the tops of places like the Peak District and Lake District in North Wales, and they find somewhere more congenial. So great place to see short-eared owls in the winter is Wixhall Moss. It's a lot milder there than right up on the tops of the moorlands. It's not so cold. The voles are still active. It's just what they mainly feed on, and it's not as windy. So hunting is much easier, and you can see them in good numbers sometimes. If it's a good vole year, voles being sort of cyclical breeders, if it's a good vole year, you get lots of owls. Hen harriers, very much the same. Moorland breeders moving to lowland areas, and also the tiny merlins, the little falcons. So any of these things can be seen really anywhere in Shropshire. So always be aware that all sorts of things are moving about, and it could be your lucky day. Partial migrants are sort of resident birds which are augmented by others of the same species which are coming from Scandinavia and continental Europe. So sometimes our own birds stay here and they're joined by other birds of the same species. So things like mallards come, very common bird on our lakes and ponds, but great flights of them come in from northeast Europe. And these birds, they travel at more than 46 miles an hour while they're migrating. They're very efficient flyers. They come long distances to take advantage of that mild winter climate we have here. Coots will do it as well. And smaller birds like chaffinches and goldcrests and starlings coming from the continent rather more regularly than coming from Scandinavia and Siberia. But because we've got that mild climate here, it's attracting them. They're moving in. So you get things like these wonderful starling murmurations. This one entertained me because it managed to make itself look a bit like a starling. Our own birds are joined by the migrant birds, and they mass together for safety while they're roosting. During the winter, they don't have to defend individual territories, so they're all getting together for the warmth, for the safety, and the migrant ones and our resident local ones are all getting together. The other thing you might not know is that blackbirds also migrate. Ours stay here, but the ones from Scandinavia and parts of Eastern Europe move here for those mild conditions. And it's possible to tell a migrant one because they quite often don't have a fully yellow beak. This is the males, of course, not the females. But if you see a male blackbird with the properly black plumage rather than the brown plumage, and it has a dull brown beak or a beak that's a bit patchy, sometimes they have a bit of yellow and a bit of black on it, that's one of the migrants. So the 2 or 3 you have using your garden in the summer will be joined by several more. And I've had occasion, I usually keep a box full of windfall apples in the garage, so that when these migrants arrive, I've got something to put out for them. And I've seen 24, 28, 30 blackbirds all in the garden together. And of course, you wouldn't see that at any other time of year. These aren't resident birds, they're not local birds. They're all coming from places where it's too cold, there's not enough for them to eat, so they're moving. Lovely to see them all, though. These are the sort of places they're migrating from and migrating to. So you're getting the ones from mainland Europe coming in, but also the ones from Scandinavia, Finland, Poland, these sort of places. So wide-ranging birds for something we think of as a garden bird. Here's another interesting one. These are, people have been very surprised to see blackcaps during the winter in their gardens, and then, well, thinking they're staying over from their summer breeding and staying in the garden all winter. But in actual fact, these are not really partial migrants. The ones we have here that breed here and we see in our gardens in the summer have moved south. Northern birds and eastern birds are moving in. So migration patterns are changing. We never used to see blackcaps in the winter at all. Now they're finding, I think with climate warming, they're finding it worthwhile coming here. And of course, they're using garden bird feeders. So you've got a good chance of seeing these in your garden. Migration patterns do change. In the early 20th century, hooded crows used to arrive over the sea from western mainland Europe into the eastern counties of England in their thousands. But the population hasn't declined in their region of origin, but immigration of these flocks of hooded crows is now almost non-existent. So climate change, alterations in the environment where they're summering can make a difference, and patterns can change. So it's well worth watching out. These birds that we describe as eruptive, these are birds that arrive in huge numbers irregularly, are what they describe as facultative rather than obligate migrants. If there's enough food where they are, in their summering grounds, they'll stay there. These are mostly birds that feed on tree seed, and crop of tree seed can be very variable. I mean, you'll know that things like beech trees and oak trees don't necessarily set a lot of nuts, fruit, mast every year. A good year is known as a mast year, and if birds like waxwings on their summering grounds, if it's a good mast year there, they'll stay there for the winter. There'll be plenty for them to eat, and we won't see any here. But in a good year for us, a bad year for the tree seed, they'll come here in large numbers. So you can see these flocks of waxwings, usually supermarket car parks. They like the berries. They like things like rowan and crabapple, and these are plants that are often put in supermarket car parks or school grounds or whatever as a decoration, and it's absolutely fabulous for spotting waxwings. They'll eat all the fruit here and then they move on. So this is a map of the sort of places that they're coming from. They come here, they stay a while, they absolutely decimate the rowan trees and things, and then they buzz off somewhere else. So these are eruptive. They might not even return to the same breeding grounds. If the fruit isn't available, the tree seed isn't available where they've come from, why would they go back there? So they move around. They move their breeding grounds around as well to where there is a good quantity of tree seed. So they're very mobile populations. Other eruptive species, things like hawfinches, these ones, they again, beech nuts, these sort of things. They've got a big, powerful beak for eating tree seeds. So beech bass, hornbeam, they're very keen on. Around Ludlow's quite, or traditionally a very good place to see them, but they can pop up anywhere. I even had one on the garden bird feeder, so it's surprising where they'll come to. Again, tree seed feeders. Redpolls go for the small tree seed like birches and alders and things like that. The smaller, much smaller beaks for picking up these tiny tree seeds, but they have the same behavior pattern. If there isn't enough tree seed where they are, they just move on. They don't tend to come in until the tree seed where they are has run out, unlike the warblers and things that we were talking about earlier, the obligate migrants that make their move ahead of the food supply running out, these ones will exhaust it and then move on. So flocks of them moving through the countryside as the season progresses. They will come to garden bird feeders, and they particularly like Niger seed. But if you have birch trees or alder trees around, it's a good place to see them. And another of the eruptives, this is the crossbills, and we've had all the common crossbills, parrot crossbills, two-barred crossbills, all seen in Shropshire. These tend to feed on pines cones, conifer cones, various sorts. And again, the fruit crop varies from year to year, so these birds will move as the crop changes. And you don't get a situation where one tree fruits this year and then another tree fruits next year. All the trees in the area tend to have a good mast year in the same year. So these birds are moving on, pursuing the source of food, if you like. So this one's a common crossbill, and this one's a parrot crossbill with a much heavier beak. So they're absolutely fabulous things, and they can pop up anywhere. So it's a bit like the passage birds, really. You don't know what's going to arrive on your doorstep, which is one of the excitements of autumn migration. Siskins are another one. We usually get a few, but occasionally you get these big eruptions of them. Big flocks of them arrive and feed on things like the birch seeds and the alder seeds and then move on. You usually have maybe 2 or 3 around your garden, but in a suitable place you can see them in big flocks. And again, fabulous thing to see, fabulous thing to look out for. Big flocks of them. So it's worth keeping your eye out when you're getting around at this time of year, not just for what you expect to see, but for the things you don't expect to see. And something unexpected always has that bit of thrill about it. So do watch out for the autumn migrants, the ones moving through, the ones coming to stay, and it's a great way of really appreciating the seasonal change. We get absolutely fabulous set of birds moving through, staying for the winter, and it's going to brighten the darker days, isn't it? So do watch out for them. Do make a point of looking for them, or just if you're out and about and you see something a little bit different or hear something a little bit different, just have a closer look, because you never know what it might be. Usual message. Think about the fact that these birds are flying thousands of miles. A single on the rail network, one train journey from Shrewsbury to Birmingham would cost you more than 4 months standard membership of Shropshire Wildlife Trust. So you can make a difference. You can make sure that there are those stop-off points, those feeding grounds, and for the passage birds, and also safe places for the winter visitors to stay and feed all winter, just by helping us look after all our 40 reserves, all places over the county that are so important for these migrant birds. So do have a think about it, and if you can manage, join us today. Thank you very much.